Leslie Cornwell, certified nurse midwife with Empowering Midwifery Education. I'm very grateful to have Louise Aucott here. And I apologize, Louise, if I should have, usually I ask before I hit record exactly how to say your last name. So please correct me if I didn't.
That's fine.
Yeah, so she is a wonderful midwife that is joining me part of my interview series. And she was going to start telling me your background story. And she said she has a lovely story. And I was like, well, I don't want you to say it twice. So let's quickly hit record. So thank you, Louise, for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. I actually first got interested in women's health when I was in high school, not the usual way, but I was always the person that my friends trusted to pierce their ears in the girls' bathroom and to do things that, you know, to
The
tell
average request person
tell me their issues about their boyfriends and their periods and their this, that, and the other thing. And for some reason, I just was always the one that was at the receiving end of a lot of questions. And I informed myself, I think, pretty well for somebody that was in a very cloistered Catholic girls' high school, and disseminated a lot of information, and then went to college. I actually majored in economics at a liberal arts college. And when I graduated, I thought I knew everything. And I met and married my husband pretty much in a very short courtship, and we've just celebrated 50 years together, so it must have worked. Everything went well. And when I had my first baby, which was about a year after I graduated, a year and a couple months, I went into it thinking, look, how hard can it be? You take a class, you do your exercises, and then having the baby's kind of like your final exam, And for somebody that thinks that they know everything, that doesn't seem too daunting. But I found out with the first contraction or two that labor is going to kick your ass, and that you have to realize what a powerful experience it is. And for me, it was a huge crossroads because it was 1974. My baby was whisked out of my arms as soon as she was born. I had an enormous episiotomy. The doctor was very impatient and yelling at me for not holding my legs still while she was doing the repair. And then she decided to give me general anesthesia for the episiotomy repair, even though I had so-called natural childbirth. And I spent a few months after that birth thinking, wow, I'm so lucky they let me have my natural childbirth, and I'm so fortunate, and kind of feeling grateful that they didn't do worse stuff to me. And then I thought, wait a minute, hold it. Why do I feel so grateful? This was pretty intense experience, and there so many things. And then I started reading books, and you're really in trouble once you start reading books and finding out, no, there's really no reason why they need to keep the OR at 62 degrees. And there's really no reason why they have to do certain things. You don't need to be in stirrups. You could be up and walking around, and you didn't really need the IV, and the beta version of the fetal monitor, and all the other stuff that went on. And I made kind of this statement to myself, if this is the best that we can do for maternity care in our country, we really are up against the wall. We're really in trouble. So I changed my career, although it was a progression. Naturally, with my fancy education behind me, I thought that education was the key to everything. That if parents were educated and they understood what their choices were and what was being done to them, that there's no way these things would keep happening. And so I went into childbirth education, and over the next few years, I got to be the teacher training coordinator for a large childbirth group, and went all over the country talking to groups of women that were planning to be teachers, and doing a 3-day seminar with them, and doing a lot of in-depth education. And everywhere I went, the story was the same. There just were not enough qualified attendants for people to have the birth that they wanted in their own home. There were not enough. And I never set out to be a midwife or a crusader or anything else like that. But I did feel that I came to a weird place. I was invited to a lot of births when I was teaching classes, and I would go and explain to people carefully, I'm not a midwife. And if I see something that's going awry, I'm going to tell you. But in addition to telling you, I'm going to make that stick. Like, if you don't believe me, I'll call 911 and you can tell it to the EMTs.
EMS, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but I had a really nice relationship with my, I guess they were clients by that time. I didn't really charge much. My first birth that I went to, I was paid by being permitted to take the placenta home to examine it. And I was so thrilled. I'm like, to my husband, I'm like, look, honey, I have a placenta that I'm going to take it apart in the bathroom sink. He's like, oh my gosh. He knew we were getting into some new territory at that point.
A whole new level, yeah.
Yes. But anyway, I kept teaching classes. I kept going to births. We moved. We were part of the group of people that thought that it was important to go back to decentralized agriculture, small is beautiful, little homesteading farms, the Mother Earth news, build your house, you know, how to heat with wood, how to make cheese, how to, you know, whatever.
I live all around the Amish. You're singing my heart story right now.
Right. And so we went back to the land, and we, in the process, learned a huge amount about ourselves and about what it really means to be independent and interdependent. But in the meantime, people started calling me as soon as we moved up here. I'm actually in my cabin now.
I was gonna say, I saw your husband
I'm up
coming
at the
back and forth.
cabin.
Yeah.
We kept our place after we moved away, but we were up here, and people called, said, I heard you moved into town. I know you're not really a midwife, but I'm planning to have my baby at home. And would you be there? And I taught the classes that I was teaching. And after I think about 50 or 60 births, I was busted for practicing with no license, which of course was absolutely true. And but they could never get the goods on me. People up here, even my backup doctor wouldn't talk to the authorities. Nobody would, you know, it's like, I don't know why you want to talk to Mrs. Aucott, you know, that kind of thing.
Everybody was protecting you. Yeah.
They were. And yet at that point, one of my friends, who was also a physician, said, well, you know, you might consider going to school. You know, you certainly would do well. And he also said, Louise, there are just some times in life when it's better to be a live dog than a dead lion. And I thought it over, and I knew that the penalty in Pennsylvania for practicing midwifery without a license, since they have a separate midwifery statute, and it was distinguished from the practice of medicine. It wasn't practicing medicine, it was practicing midwifery. So the penalty was a $10 fine, $10 to $100 fine, which is not too scary. But back when that law was written in 1909, that $10 was actual real money. And that wasn't the part that made me decide to go back to nursing school and to midwifery school. The part for me was that I had done maybe 60 or 70 births, and I knew that eventually you can do, you know, 100 births, you can do 500 births and nothing bad happens, but your 501st baby's going to die, and a baby will die at some point, and there's nothing you can do to keep that from happening. And so once a death occurs and you're committing a misdemeanor, all right, which it's all it was a misdemeanor. But once a death occurs, then it immediately converts to a felony and becomes a felony manslaughter. And then it would be very difficult to pursue your dream of being a midwife, because you wouldn't even be allowed into nursing school or midwifery school or anything.
You might, how long you'd be sitting in jail, and would you get to see your,
exactly. And I had 3 tiny kids by that time. And, you know, it was just a non-starter. So I went to nursing school while we still lived up here, and there was no midwifery school. There was no community-based nurse midwifery education programs. You know, there was nothing at that time. And so I knew I would have to move eventually back someplace where I could attend school. So we moved back to New Jersey, northern New Jersey, and I attended school at downstate in Brooklyn after having another, you know, a few years later and having another baby and all that. So I graduated from downstate in 1988 and worked at a birth center that was one of the nicest birth centers ever. And when I say I'm using the word nice correctly, it was just almost too nice. Like the decor, the lavender paint on all the doors, and the geese with the blue ribbons tied around their necks and all that stuff. I mean, really, it was nice. But I hated it because I felt like, first of all, these people were still in an institution. They were not shown a way of having increased autonomy. And their expectations many times were that the responsibility for the outcome of their birth was going to be shared among a larger group of people. And that's one reason why people give birth in institutions, is to try and not take full responsibility, which is kind of crazy when you're talking about your healthy body and your healthy baby. It's one thing if you turn things over to a doctor when you have cancer, but it's another thing when you're having a baby. So
I joke and compare it. It's kind of like a wedding planner. A normal life event all of a sudden becomes medicalized, and there's fear and there's a process. Like you're taking a normal, healthy stage of life and turning it into a disease. It's really interesting.
Exactly. And the problem with it is that it's been done to birth with very little forethought. Nobody thought to themselves, wow, wouldn't it be cool if we make everybody lie on their back when they're trying to push their baby out? And while we're at it, let them push their baby out over a 4-foot cliff. And like, that's not very physiologic. I'm sorry. And I knew from my own experiences that what birth could be like. And so working in this birth center, I had a wonderful career there. Everybody loved me. I loved everybody. I didn't need much training because I already knew what I was doing. But one day we had taken on a whole new caseload that had this particular type of HMO insurance that allowed them to have midwives, but they could have the midwife in the hospital or in the birth center. And they were all choosing to have a midwife in the hospital because they could still have drugs, but the midwife would hold their hand through the whole labor. Well, you can imagine how well that sat with me, but I was a team player. And I remember going in after working at the birth center for about 2 years. And I went in one Sunday morning, and it was like my 4th birth of the weekend. I was really so exhausted. I look at the woman who's already being admitted, and she's sitting there in the bed in her little hospital Johnny, and she's got a thermometer in her mouth, and she has a blood pressure cuff on one arm. And I hadn't written orders. I didn't order IVs. I didn't order anything, but they had their routines. So I recognized her. I had seen her once in her pregnancy when she's about 18 weeks pregnant. And I said, hello, Lynn, my name is Louise, and I'll be your midwife today. Like, I'll be your waitress, you know. And she took the thermometer out of her mouth and said, okay, but I just want you to know this is my 2nd baby and I want an epidural. And I said, well, A lot of people feel that way when their labor gets intense. But before I would even be able to call the doctor or the anesthesiologist, I'm going to need to examine you now. Do I have your permission to do that? And she said, yes, but I want an epidural. I'm like, well, let's just see where we are, you know. And I put on a glove and carefully examined her. And she was, midwives are mostly going to hear this, right? She was 6 centimeters, paper thin. Baby's head was right down there, membrane still intact. Heartbeat looks great on the monitor. And 0 station, you know, right there. Second baby,
Yeah.
you know.
Wouldn't take much, yeah.
Yeah, it's the second baby discount, you know.
Yeah.
You suffered enough with the first one. But I said, well, good news. You know, I think that before we would even be able to get a doctor in here and get you your epidural and tape it up your back and all that kind of thing, your
Meds
baby,
actually kick in,
I mean,
yeah.
dilated. Your baby will be coming. This birth is fairly imminent. And she looked at me and she said, can you guarantee that? And I said, you know, I hardly know this person. She's making a request. I have a job to do. I said, no, I cannot guarantee that. I can think it based on my professional experience. I can hope it for your sake, but I cannot guarantee that. She said, okay, then I want an epidural. So I call the doctor. I call, and he says, you know, that he'll be in. He's at a dentist appointment, but he'll be in about 45 minutes. Meantime, she's laboring away. But I figure he's going to go ahead and order the epidural because that's what she wants. He calls the anesthesiologist. They come, they take her history. Meantime, I'm trying to whip 2 liters of fluid into her so that she can tolerate the epidural. They finally get the epidural in, and she's put back, you know, like put your legs back on the bed and get you settled in. And her baby has an enormous D-cell. And the nurses are just going about their business. They're like used to this. Like it's no big deal, but I'm freaking out. I'm like, whoa, the baby's heartbeat's like only 60 right now. And they're like, well, that happens a lot of times with an epidural. And I'm thinking, that can't be too good for anybody. But long story short, she gets ready to push. She said, I still feel it. I can still feel it. And I'm like, well, the baby's coming and you're going to feel something when the baby comes out. You know, by this time, I'm like, what am I doing this for? Am I some kind of, you know, prostitute that I have to make money by having, you know, these experiences that I would never choose for myself?
Yeah.
But she's pushing, she pushes. The baby has another big D-cell. Now we have caput. Somebody in the room wants me to put on a scalp electrode. I'm like, no, we're having a baby. We're just going to have a baby. The doctor who's over my left shoulder says, are you going to cut an episiotomy? And I said, well, that had not been my plan. But now that you have said that in a room full of medical personnel, and you know, I feel like I have to, because what happens if there's a problem and I didn't do what you said?
Yep. You went against
I created a little tiny 1st-degree laceration. Snip. The baby flew out. Wah, 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 wah. I encourage her to reach for her baby. She reaches for her baby. The baby goes on her belly. Cover it up with a blanket. She looks at me with this look and says, that was so wonderful. That was just what I wanted. It was so perfect. And, you know, I didn't even know what to say. I went home that day after that birth, just crying, like sliming my steering wheel in the car. This is what I'm doing now for a living. And I said, I just have to go back to doing home births again. This is not going to work for me. I can't do this in, you know, in good faith for a career. And about 2 days later, a midwife called me saying, "Hey, yeah, guess what? I'm pregnant. Will you deliver me at home?" And I said, "What? Have you been talking to my steering wheel? Like, what happened?" She
Yeah, the
said,
universe is, yeah, somebody's been talking to you. Mhm.
and within a month, I had like 4 clients that all had gotten wind
Yeah,
somehow that I
doesn't
was
take much.
hoping to start a home birth practice again. And I gave the birth center 10 months notice, which you'd think would have been enough time for them
That's
to
quite
pull their
impressive. Yeah, that's very gracious. Mhm.
together, right?
Yeah. That's even more than the pregnancy when they know, like at least if it's 3 to 6 months, you've
Right.
already committed. You gave the buku version.
Right. I gave them a huge lead time. And by the time 4 months had gone by, I had 28 clients that were due starting the following February, like February 2nd, 5th, 14th, 22nd, and so on. About 4 months for 6 months, or whatever that would be. I think that's about right.
Mhm.
It was great. It was great telling them just no more paychecks, but it got me into a whole different mindset when it came to midwifery. Being a midwife isn't a job. I don't know how other to say it. It's not a job. It's not even a career. What
Mhm.
it is really a calling. It really is a calling. You really are called to it because it is a very tough way to make a living. You have to be a person that cannot be happy doing any other thing. If you can feel happy and satisfied doing any other thing, OB nursing, pediatrics, anything, do it.
Mhm.
But if you cannot be satisfied and happy doing some other thing, join the crowd.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really how I got started in my own practice. That was in 1990. The practice is still going. There are now 3 midwives. They do mostly home births, but they have full hospital privileges with backup consisting of maternal fetal medicine specialists for prenatal issues, and then the in-hospital laborists for anything that comes up whether they're in the hospital with somebody or whether they're at home.
Yeah.
They have about a 5 to 6% rate of C-section. They have about a 5 to 6% rate of transfer from home into the hospital when somebody is choosing a home birth. The choice of our practice to have hospital privileges was centered on the fact that our cesarean rate in New Jersey is well over a third of all women. And so if a third of all women have a surgically scarred uterus when they come in your door, unless you're just only going to take care of the other 2/3, you have to be able to provide an equivalent option for them. And a lot of people really like the style of care that they got from people that have physiologic birth at the forefront of what they do. And so we had a caseload that consisted of maybe 70 to 80% people looking for a home birth and maybe 20 to 30% looking for a hospital birth. And not especially low risk. It's not like super, super ultra low risk people only, but we still managed to keep our statistics pretty amazing to the point where the doctors at the hospital now, in light of having over 3 decades with no train wrecks, no so-called train wrecks.
I know that
No
word.
big problems. Yes, no, nothing that they can point their finger at in this case and that case. Nah, there's no cases. So, so they're inclined to keep up with it. Plus, I always made a practice when I worked there. I've been retired now for almost 8 years, but I always made a practice, or over 8 years, of approaching any new doctor that was in the rotation and saying, "So, did you ever wonder how you came to be the home birth backup? Because we should talk about that, especially since you're professional organization, your trade group has like a different view of home birth than I have, likely. And really explaining to them what we did and how we did it. And, well, do you have IVs at home? And I'm like, yeah, if I need them, I have them. If I need, some people need an IV or treatment of some sort, well, what about this and what about that? And pretty soon they're like, well, I might not want to do it, but if you want to do it.
Yeah.
So I feel really good about the fact we just had baby number 2000 about a week ago in the practice, which is a nice milestone, because there's been the creation of a very mindful type of care that everyone can see and appreciate. And the midwives who are still working were students and also friends and clients. And that's probably the best combination. If they trusted you to do their birth, and then
the deep passion, they're not going anywhere. Yeah.
Right. And the trust in birth, trust in you, trust in one another. They knew each other for a long time. One of them was a student at the other one's second birth, and it goes on and on. But in any case, that's the story. And my current concerns are how money and insurance and false information are conspiring to limit the choices that people have in their births. That's my biggest concern, and something that I want to address in the book that I'm writing, and something that I think bears examination. It's almost impossible to tell people anymore what the data shows about fetal monitoring, for example, and that how preferable it is to have intermittent auscultation. And there's also this thing going on that I wasn't really even aware of, but I was made aware of it by talking to a young person who's in her early 30s. And she said, there are a lot of people that just are deciding that they just will go along with whatever the doctor says. And they're deciding that because they think arguing with the doctor makes them anti-science. And that that puts them on the wrong side of a lot of arguments. Like if they argue with the doctor, that means they're the equivalent of being an anti-vaxxer, or they're the equivalent of, because they're worried about not appearing to defy medical science.
Okay.
And so, well, science is different from what you're really talking about. You're talking about people's opinions a lot of the
beliefs,
time.
opinions, perspectives, and their
Exactly.
viewpoints now being turned into research or data or
right.
evidence.
And so that's very true. And I had not anticipated that was something that people are saying, well, when it comes to childbirth, ignorance is bliss. And when or of course I'm having an epidural, why would you want to suffer that pain? That kind of stuff. And I'm like, holy moly. I mean, I'm certainly not going to fight and die on that hill, but I do become very concerned that people have lost the plot a little bit. And starting a forest fire with your gender reveal party, certain other things. Everybody, just to be very frank, everybody's shaving off all their pubic hair. All these things that are like, how do we get this into the general realm of what we think is normal?
Right.
And that's kind of where I'm at right now. But I have lots and lots of time to reflect on it, because when you're retired, you don't have to worry when you lay your little head down at night that you're not going to wake up on the same pillow in the morning. And it was quite a career. It was
Well, and part of when you're discussing, I think so many people, we have so much knowledge at our fingertips, but people are mentally shutting down when you say ignorance or bliss. It's not just healthcare. Their information overload as a whole, their subconscious, their conscious is like, I can't research it. Yes, you could Google search, you could spend
Right.
3 hours. Like they're in that rat wheel survival mode information. I mean, it was amazing to me like how fast things are changing in data, and the human being can't keep up with it. So I think it's a combination of not just healthcare, but overall with decision makings. It's just whether it's a level of trust with a policy or an organization, they're the experts. They did the assumptions, they did the research for me. So I'm so grateful they're out there. Like I don't have to look into that mindset.
Right. Well, I think one of the pitfalls there is that, okay, just going back to 1976 for a minute, which was 2 years after my daughter was born, and really when I started to get involved. At that moment, from what I could tell, we knew certain things about physiologic birth. We knew that mothers should be able to eat and drink, that they should be able to walk around, that they should be able to give birth in any position of safety and comfort, that they should,
have choices over
be,
their body versus they're asking permission. Yeah.
Didn't all need interventions of various kinds. We knew that they didn't need to be shaped. We knew that they didn't need to be this, that, and the other. So we knew a lot
enemas
of things.
And the list goes on and on, all those trends.
But we knew that. However, we didn't have data to back it up. Then along about, I'm going to say the real burst of data that first really showed up was maybe a little less than 10 years ago, like 2014, 2015, that now we have actual studies.
Yep, the Lancet Midwifery journal has, extensive.
That we know that what we thought just as another mother, those things were true. And now we have stuff to document it. And how long did that take? Like 30 years, right? 35 years. So that period of time, my husband gets such a charge out of this. I've renamed that 35-year span. It has become in our household a Semmelweis, because it took about 35 years for people to realize that washing your hands meant fewer postpartum infections.
Amazing. Yeah.
That's Ignaz Semmelweis' great contribution to our medical science. And so does it really take 35 years between knowing that something's right and getting it, and then even another 35 perhaps to implementing that and making it possible?
The cultural changes and there
are so many ways in which our system is reliant on a very cracked, faulty business model for OB. I'm going to give you a quote. You're going to love this.
Okay.
This has to do with induction of labor.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
This is, wait a second. I'm just finding it because I have it written down. Okay. So induction, this is a quote from a friend of mine. Induction is a corporate business model tool that allows the institution to control the flow of customers through the business setting. And without induction, hospitals would actually have to admit that they're unable to provide care spontaneously. In other words, what COVID did to overwhelm the system would happen every day on labor and delivery wards if people weren't induced.
Yep. 100% agree. It's looking at it as this really medically necessary, or the electives. It's the other layer of, if you don't do these and enough people don't do these, you really see we aren't able to handle normal birth. Yeah.
Right, exactly. We can't provide care spontaneously.
Yep.
And I think that when you reflect upon that and you reflect upon the alternative way of looking at it, it's sort of like in my little dreamy midwifery world, people can go into labor anytime or any place and have their baby anytime or any place.
Yep.
So that's something. And
Yeah,
then
I
the
think
other,
that's been the hardest thing. I always would joke if I could make an algorithm for birth, all my family's engineers except for me. So we always joke math was easy and I chose
right,
the hard job and career fresh and the calling. But it is when you're trying to support women and you're trying to help with burnout and you're trying to do a community setting in a radius that, like, how do we do the best we can in the backdrops to reduce the
right.
risk of those ebbs and flows, but also still in the forefront, be totally available and totally have a balance. It's an art with community-based midwifery. It's very
It
difficult.
is. And of course, the other problem is that there's no denying that exerting that type of control over the birth process does make it easier for you, just not for the baby and the mother.
Yep.
But you're in the hospital and you have a nurse and you have a lounge where you have your own coffee mug
Right.
and all
Yeah,
that
it's
stuff.
nice to get up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon versus 4 in the morning. And
Right.
yeah.
And then the other thing that has started to become a real factor for me, and I'm not going to discuss anything about our national politics, but I have a basic feeling that bodily autonomy is an essential and unconditional liberty. So if you don't accept that bodily autonomy is an essential unconditional liberty, it's a waste of time talking to you at all.
Yeah.
That's my bottom line.
Yeah.
There are no other liberties that survive without that one. It's much more fundamental than property rights. And if you don't own yourself, you own nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I love history and I love seeing the rise and falls of economies and the world and culture and trends. And it's interesting to see when you start taking away the knowledge and the choices or the cultural of like what are options. It's interesting to see I don't want to say divides, but the different beliefs really come out of who's willing to stand up for what they believe in and who is more of like, okay, it's more important to be part of the peer, the norm, the group. So yeah, I don't talk politics either, Louise, but I think it's fascinating the times we're living in now of we have some really amazing opportunities of very different directions our future society and culture can go. And it really comes down to us individually and what we believe and what we stand up for. But I appreciate you greatly. I could talk to you for hours and hours. I try to do, maybe if you want to end the last 5 minutes with like kind of words of wisdom for the next generation, maybe midwives practicing, the next generation, just kind of some, maybe it's your conclusion summary at the end of your book that you're finishing. Who knows what you want to share?
Well, I think that the main thing is that I am a person who believes that the source of most or much of human misery are mismatched expectations.
Yeah.
That if your expectation is that you're going to be able to work as a midwife as a job and have a 40-hour-a-week job and take home 120 grand a year, and what you get is actually 2 8-hour clinic days where you see 45 people each day, 25 in the morning and 20 in the afternoon. And then you have one 24-hour call. This is adding up to 40 hours, you'll notice.
Right.
One 24-hour call where you probably deliver at least one, but it could be as many as 3 or 4 babies or a set of twins or whatever. And you still feel questioning and empty because you don't know who these people are. You don't know any of your clients. They have no continuity of care. You're participating in a very mechanized and very high risk system. To me, a lot of the risk is removed by actually knowing people and they know you. But I think that that's where we lose the plot when we look at it as that type of job and look at that as an ideal way of achieving work-life balance. I don't think that work and life have to be that separate. And so achieving a balance is kind of very organic to me. You know, being on call as a solo practitioner anyway, being on call 24/7 was not easy, but I still got to live my life. You're going to be living through those years anyway, even if you're on call. And that's the one thing. So to try to match your expectations with, you know, the reality of what you want. For me, the ideal was very different from that. I didn't care if I was on call 84 hours a week, that's half a week. It's 168 hours in a week, just to refresh your, I know, well, you're not the math one in the family, so.
I can do math, and we just don't know.
That's actually just arithmetic. That's just arithmetic, actually. That's not math. So anyway, no. And then the other thing that I think is very important for people to acknowledge is that, you know, you're not everybody's going to love you. Not everybody's going to be happy with you and how things work out. But that you can approach each interaction and each encounter in a clear way. You don't want to be carrying around a whole load of stuff, of your own stuff or any other stuff, that you really need to be clear. There are a few other things I could probably say that are pearls, you know. My old backup doctor had many pearls of wisdom in his time, and he was, you know, one of his famous sayings, of course, because people would always be questioning, how will I know if the baby's okay? That's a basic, right? How do I know if my baby's okay? And he would say, in his very strong Italian accent, Louise, you cannot have a sick baby and a healthy baby at one and the same time. You know, and he would say that very profoundly. And of course it's true, but those are the types of things, you know, listen to people that know a lot. I'm worried, though, after having this conversation with this young woman, that the medical practitioners that feel it's important to be obeyed will learn to manipulate people based on, oh, well, if you won't listen to what I say, I'm the doctor. You must be a crazy kook.
Yeah, there's labeling, and that's the answer versus
and I
having a
think that
conversation.
that's really a danger. I think that's really problematic. But in any case, I very much enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you.
I'm sure the minute we hang up, I'll think of 30 other things I probably could have said, but that gives you
I have a few more minutes, Louise. After I pause the recording from our wonderful conversation, I wrote some things that I would love to just pick your brain and talk to you, because you are a woman after my soul. You really are. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Have a great day.